This is the most insane story of World War I that almost nobody knows. Imagine being trapped in a coffin, buried 100 feet underground. It's damp, it's freezing, and the walls are literally sweating. But you aren't dead. Not yet. Above you, the greatest war in human history is screaming, but down here, it's so quiet you can hear your own heart hammering against your ribs. Suddenly, you freeze. You hold your breath. There's a sound. Just inches from your head, the enemy is digging a tunnel directly into yours, and he's holding a knife. This isn't your typical trench warfare. This is the silent war, fought in absolute crushing darkness. A war that started with simple spades and ended with the largest explosion the world had ever seen before the atomic bomb. A blast so massive it was heard all the way in London. Today, I'm going to show you how absolutely terrifying it was to survive beneath the earth. The year is 1914. On the surface, it's total chaos. Machine guns and heavy artillery have turned the world into a meat grinder of mud and jagged steel. Nobody can move an inch without being shredded. The generals are losing their minds because every single offensive ends in a horrific bloodbath. So, the British came up with an idea so crazy it was actually brilliant. If we can't go over the trenches, we'll go under them. But how do you dig a tunnel under enemy lines without them hearing you? If you hit a rock with a pickaxe, the enemy can hear it for miles. The solution. They brought in the pros from civilian life, the clay kickers. These were men who normally spent their days digging the London Underground subway tunnels. These guys weren't your average soldiers. They used a technique that was completely silent. The kicker would lie on his back, feet pressed against the tunnel face. He'd drive a specialized spade into the clay and slice out quiet chunks, which were then hauled away by helpers. While the Germans were stuck in the filth above, these tunnel pirates were creeping inches at a time right under their boots. They dug 25 feet a day. That's 4 times faster than any military engineer thought possible. But here's where it gets dark. These tunnels weren't grand hallways. They were often only 2 feet high. You couldn't stand, you could barely move, and you were never, ever alone. The conditions were a total nightmare. It was bone-chillingly cold. The water was often up to your knees, and the air was so toxic that candles would just flicker out. The men worked in total darkness just to save what little oxygen was left. Many carried caged canaries, just like coal miners. If that bird suddenly fell off its perch, you knew the gas was coming. You had exactly 30 seconds to crawl out of that hole before your lungs literally collapsed. But gas wasn't even your biggest worry. The worst part was the listening. Specialized teams sat for hours with stethoscopes pressed against the tunnel walls, listening to the earth. They called it acoustic chess. The scariest part wasn't hearing the enemy digging. The most terrifying thing you could hear was absolute silence, because silence meant the enemy was done. They had placed the bomb. They had armed the fuse, and they were just waiting for the perfect moment to bury you alive. Sometimes the statistical nightmare scenario happened. 2 tunnels collided. In the middle of the night, the wall in front of you would suddenly cave in, and dust would explode into the air. For a split second, you'd stare into the face of an enemy soldier who was just as terrified as you were. In that moment, there were no rifles. There was no room to aim a weapon. In those cramped tubes, it was a fight with knives, bare hands, and sharpened trench shovels. It was brutal, medieval siege combat in the heart of the 20th century. Whoever stabbed first or crushed the other's skull survived. The bodies were often left exactly where they fell because there was simply no room to carry them out. The stench in those tunnels became so overpowering that men would vomit before their shift even started. But all this horror underground was leading to one massive goal, the ultimate strike from nowhere. The best example is the Battle of Messines in June 1917. The British had spent over 18 months digging 21 massive chambers under the German lines. They packed these hollows with nearly 1 million pounds of high-explosive ammonal. Think about that. 500,000 kilograms of explosives right under the feet of sleeping soldiers. The Germans knew someone was digging, but the British had gone deeper into a layer of blue clay that swallowed every sound. They even dug decoy tunnels to trick the German listeners into looking in the wrong place. Think about the psychological toll this took on the men above ground. Every soldier in the frontline trenches knew that at any given second, the ground beneath them could simply vanish. They would be sleeping or eating, and then nothing. Total annihilation. This created a level of paranoia that broke even the toughest veterans. Men would refuse to sit on the floor of the trench. They would stare at the mud, waiting for a vibration, waiting for the earth to heave. It was an invisible monster waiting to swallow them whole. On June 7th, 1917, at exactly 3:10 a.m., it was time. The generals gave the order. For miles around, every soldier held his breath. Then, the lever was pulled. What happened next is almost impossible to describe. The earth literally rose up in massive domes before exploding in a colossal pillar of fire. 19 of the mines detonated at the exact same time. The shockwave was so powerful it was registered in London, over 130 miles away. The windows in Downing Street actually rattled. 10,000 German soldiers vanished in a single heartbeat. Just gone. The landscape afterwards looked like the surface of the moon. Where there used to be hills and villages, there were now craters over 300 feet wide. It was a shock so deep that the survivors were found wandering around in a total daze, unable to fight or even understand what had just happened. But here is the part that still gives me chills today. They placed 21 mines, but only 19 went off. The other 2 remained live in the ground, lost and forgotten under the fields of Belgium. Decades passed. Farmers ploughed their fields, families built houses, and kids played on top of ticking time bombs. Fast forward to the year 1955. It was a normal day with a passing thunderstorm when suddenly lightning struck a tree. That tree was directly above one of those forgotten mines. In a fraction of a second, 20 tons of World War I explosives detonated. There was no warning. A massive crater tore through the field, and an innocent cow was literally vaporized. Imagine living in a place where the ground you walk on is still armed and ready to kill you 100 years later. There are still millions of unexploded shells and massive mines buried beneath the peaceful farmland of France and Belgium. Every year, during the iron harvest, farmers pull up tons of steel. But the mines, they are still waiting. The final megabomb is still out there. Somewhere under the peaceful grass of Flanders, another 250,000 kilograms of explosives are waiting for the right spark. We just don't know exactly where it is. It's a ticking clock that has been counting down for over a century, and nobody knows when the alarm will go off. The tunnel war destroyed the men who survived it. Many could never sleep in a room with a closed door ever again. They developed a phobia of the sky because the wide-open horizon felt unnatural after months of staring at a wooden beam inches from their nose. Some would spend the rest of their lives sleeping in closets or supply sheds because only the feeling of walls pressing in made them feel safe. They had been transformed into creatures of the dark. Their eyes were ruined by the lack of light, and their minds were ruined by the constant, agonizing silence. It was a world without sun, without hope, and often without mercy. The tunnel rats of the Great War weren't just soldiers. They were shadows in a forgotten dimension of the battlefield. They were the men who looked into the abyss every single day, knowing that the abyss was staring back with a pickaxe in its hand. If you want to know how a secret team in Vietnam took this underground horror to a whole new level with venomous snakes, booby-trapped scorpions, and narrow labyrinths designed to trap you in a permanent tomb, then you need to see our next mission. This was TeamAlphaSix. Subscribe for more tactical history that they never told you about in school. We'll see you in the next mission.